There are breaches happening all the time, probably every minute. We don't hear about most of them, but we hear about breaches, it seems, almost at least daily. Some weeks it's more than that. They're going on everywhere all the time. There's constantly high profile and even some lower profile breaches, vulnerabilities being found, being actively exploited, causing all kinds of problems, wreaking havoc in various industries all over the place. And yet, there's an entire cybersecurity industry, incredibly well-funded, well-motivated, producing products and offering solutions to help stop this. And it has been for a very long time. This industry is not new. It's not like we just learned, oh, there's problems in security, we need to work on them. We've been working at it forever. Great vendors, great products, great solutions, great services, great concepts, and yet it's not working comprehensively enough. Why? The way I want to phrase the question is, why isn't cybersecurity more effective? Not that it can't be. I believe it can be. I think there are things we can do to be better. But my question, what I want to explore is, with all of the massive investment in creating solutions to the problem, why hasn't it been stopped? Why is it still an issue? Worth exploring, maybe?
Yeah. Let's go.
Well, let's explain. Let's talk about it a little bit. Again, welcome to Cybersplainers, everyone. We want to talk about an issue that I think is very, very broad-reaching. We're going to try not to get too specific or too in the weeds on any one subtopic, but we want to talk about a broad area because I think it's an important thing to address that's hard to address. It's very easy, and all the marketing we hear from vendors is, oh, here's a solution that'll solve this problem, and they want to sell you a solution. They want to solve a specific problem that they can be helpful with, and we get lost in that. I think we get lost in the specifics and try to implement that, and yet maybe that's not the biggest problem for our organization. Maybe there's another area we should be focusing on, but that one's so exciting, and I get it, I understand it, so I focus on that thing, and I miss the forest for the trees. There's something else I probably should have been focused on that just doesn't get done, and ultimately that's what's going to be breached. That's what's going to lead to our problem because I addressed this bigger thing, didn't address this other thing, and I think that's where we see a lot of the breaches we're aware of, never mind the ones we're not aware of.
Or do you think it's maybe we're addressing a smaller thing when we need to be addressing a broader thing?
Sometimes it could be. Like I know whatever the hot topic is of the day, everybody focuses on that because it's been such a well-publicized issue that somebody, maybe a similar company to yours in the same sector, had that problem. You don't want to be the next one to have that problem, so you focus all of your efforts on that when there's other bigger issues you should be solving. We've all seen this, and joining me today, of course, as always, is Chelsea.
Hi, Eric.
Hi, Chelsea. And also Florian Riederer, our cybersecurity researcher, I will say, at our day job at Atlantic Data Security, who has the good fortune of being able to look into a lot of these topics, a lot of whether they're breaches or solutions, and constantly
Well, sort of trying
learning.
to bridge the gap between the technical details and the high levels for our various audiences, business leaders, and cybersecurity experts.
But to every audience, which is what we try to do as well, is we want to address things to leaders, to end users, to consumers, and help kind of bridge the gaps, as you said. And you've been doing a great job of that, I think. And we've worked a lot,
that's
of
not
that
going
together.
in.
Collaborated. We all collaborate on these things to do them together. But it gives you an interesting insight because you're doing it you're not trying to sell anything. You're not trying to push anything. You're just trying to be helpful and informative on these issues. So you've gotten to cover a lot of it where we get tied into other things in our day jobs and focus in other areas. So I think I really wanted to have you on to help share some of that other perspective because we're all about different perspectives.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for coming, for going out of your way to be here. Making the special trip. No, but really, it's been a pleasure working with you for a while anyway. So this is great for me to be able to share some of you with more people as well, and for us to all
sit down
bat
together.
this around a little bit. So we don't have much, as usual, of a predefined script or anything. We have a topic. We have some things we've talked about off air that we want to discuss that we think might be interesting, but I'd like to just explore with both of you some of the other reasons. I have mine. I sort of shared some of that already with my feelings and beliefs as to why we're failing, but it's a lot more to it than that. I think the technology exists to solve pretty much every problem. Any cybersecurity challenge, there is a solution. And it's easy in hindsight, in retrospect, to look at any particular breach and say, well, if only they had done this or implemented that.
It's always the fundamentals that get you.
It is. To some degree, because everything's fundamental, too.
Yeah.
So it's always a fun...
But you can have enough. You can have all the technology in place in the world, and if it's a human error, like
Yeah.
you can't fix people.
Well, I'll expand on that. We all know human error is a big thing, clicking something they shouldn't have clicked, a user just making a mistake. And I won't even say dumb mistake.
Yeah.
It's easy to be fooled, even though you know what to
Yeah.
do, what not to do. There are some very, and we talk about AI lately, and the attackers and the cyber criminals using AI to sound much better than they used to. English is not as broken as it once was. There's much better language.
Yeah.
And even the disguising and masquerading as a known contact, sending you something that seems legit. It's very, very
I mean,
easy.
I feel like every week between like LinkedIn, Twitter, just general gossip, there's the story of like this latest scam that someone almost fell for, and it's usually incredibly sophisticated,
Yeah.
Yeah.
targeted, sounds
it's not
professional
as-
and legit.
The
Like,
mistakes aren't as dumb as they used to be.
it's not
Yeah.
Nigerian princes all the time.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's not a Nigerian prince asking for money from your grandma. Like,
It's
No,
your daughter
it's-
calling, or
Yeah.
Or it's your
the
cousin.
local sheriff.
Or it's your
Yeah.
cousin saying, hey, grandma's in the hospital, we need this. And you're,
Yeah.
oh, wow, and you got to
Yeah.
react. And it came from your cousin's actual email address because they got their email hacked. So, but again, I want to reel it back in because that's just one example. Human error.
Yeah. Mhm.
We're fallible. We are humans. As long as humans have some control over our technology, we will make mistakes.
Yeah.
And whether they're dumb mistakes or not, even in those cases, there is technology to mitigate the effects of a mistake.
Right.
And in some organizations that we've all seen cases of this where, wow, somebody did make a mistake, but the technology caught
Yeah.
it.
Yep.
They had
I
a
mean,
solution in
not
place.
every phishing fail, click link results in a ransomware company.
yeah.
Well, and there's two ways to combat it. One is to block it from getting into your
Yeah.
mailbox, and there are solutions
I mean,
for
that's
that,
the first thing
of
you
all.
should be doing, but that's never
Preventative.
going to be 100% perfect. So you still need the human.
Right.
layer.
There's the preventative is ideally get rid of it, block
Yeah.
it, stop it. But there will be something, again, from a known contact that gets through because the solution can only do so much.
Yeah.
And then it's on the person to know not to make a mistake or on their endpoint
Well,
security
and
solutions.
then
to
behind,
then
I mean,
block
behind the
impact.
person who might click the link, you need another security layer to protect them.
Well, that goes to defense in depth and layer defenses.
Yeah.
And yes,
Well,
having multiple layers.
But then you also need the IT team or the security team, that human factor, to have everything configured properly there, right?
And that's
like,
exactly where I'm going. is
between
it's-
those multiple layers of human technology,
Right.
there it's hard to prevent every gap.
Mistakes will happen by the individual.
Yeah.
Individuals make mistakes
Yeah.
that directly, immediately lead to something. Hopefully, we've either blocked it or blocked the impact, reduced, mitigated the result of it so it's not as devastating, or at least gets identified quickly. But there's another whole side to the human error, and it's not human mistakes or stupidity. And I don't
Yeah.
want to say that because it's not stupid. People that say, oh, I did something so stupid. No, you didn't. You were misled. You're gullible like all of us, and you were trying to do the right thing. It just turned out to not be the right thing. So it's
Yeah.
not about stupid mistakes or doing something you really shouldn't have. Maybe you shouldn't have, but they're really good at fooling us. So I don't even like to put it on the person as stupid. I don't like to use those words. We have to understand, I think, first of all, when somebody does make that mistake, don't jump down their throat.
Yeah.
Don't scold them. Unless they've done it 7 or 8 times, then yeah, you reach a point, okay,
Yeah.
my patience is running thin. But
I mean,
ideally,
but even then, like, the scolding's probably not going to help fix it.
make it a learnable thing,
Yeah.
teachable, learn from. Again, as long as it didn't devastate your company and bankrupt you, then learn from it. Don't hold them out as an example for public lashing. It's more of a,
Yeah.
let's use this as an example. Ideally, understand, shift, again, our perspective as the responder to this. I see how that happened to you.
Yeah.
I know why you did that. Wow, that was a really well formatted,
Yeah.
nasty email. I might have been fooled too.
I mean, it's one of those things, if you want to build a security conscious culture as a company, then, like,
Yeah.
You need to educate people on stuff
need-
that
yeah.
they need to be, like little things that you wouldn't think to look out for because everything looks legit.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
you'd also much rather have the culture of openness where someone feels comfortable saying, hey, I clicked this thing.
Yeah.
Maybe I shouldn't have, rather than like trying to sweep it under the
If,
rug.
if they've
Yeah.
seen their colleagues get
yeah.
embarrassed because of it and held out
Yeah.
publicly, they're going to be less likely to report something when it happens
Yeah.
and just hope nobody notices because they don't want to be the next one embarrassed. So you have to make it more of a, we're going to deal with it positively and respectfully. You're not going to be punished. You're not going to be called out. We're going to help solve it. And now you can create a culture of we're all in this together. And if
Yeah.
you see something, say something.
Yeah.
Notify the team. Let us know. Say, oh, I clicked this thing. I'm sorry. It was.
And know who to contact about
That's
it.
a whole different issue, a whole different topic, another podcast of incident response and what do we do when something happens. But exactly, Chelsea, we need to make sure that everyone's willing to do that and not risk embarrassment or being fired, because then they're going to try and hide it. And we
Right.
don't want them
I
hiding.
think it's understanding that people are people. So giving them the resources to be that way is just a part of the human element of this. You know?
I've backed off of this in my personal life, where those of us in technology, especially if we've been there for a long time, we have family members coming to us with things. And it wasn't that long ago. I'd have family come to me and say, hey, I clicked this thing. I think I might be ransomed, or I'm seeing this thing on my screen that says I should call the FBI at this number right now. Should I do it? No.
Yeah.
But I would respond. And I think early on, I had this tendency to respond maybe a little bit snidely or a little bit negatively derogatory, like, oh, you idiot. I didn't say that, but I've always had a little more tact, I like to think. But still, it was a little harsher response.
Yeah.
And I learned eventually to soften the response a little bit, because I do want them contacting me when something happens. I don't want them to be afraid to reach out for fear of my harshness. You think something happened, call me. If I know it's really basic, I'll do it. But I also would then try to enable and show them how to identify, yes, that's bad, or no, it's not. It's like, okay, if your computer is locked on a screen that says call the FBI because we've locked your computer because we detected something, on your phone, do a little lookup. I was using certain websites. I would direct them to see if that's a current ongoing scam, and it's known, like, yeah, that's fake. Here's what to do about it. And I would try to educate them to do it. And if they didn't after 2 or 3 times, and I get a little harsher, like, here's the link again. Check it yourself first. And then it started to work, because people would contact me and say, Eric, I think I have a problem. I looked it up over here, and here's what it said. I was like, oh, wow, yeah, that's good. Let me come over and help you. And I'm fine. But
Came in pre-triaged.
Yeah.
well, enable them to do a little bit of that.
Yeah.
That's, I've, as an instructor, part of the time, I love sharing that. It's part of what this is about, is let's get the information out there so people know more.
Yeah.
It 20 years ago in cybersecurity, 25 years ago especially, it was more, no, we're the police. We're going to do things. We're going to do it. Just do it because I said so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd rather, within organizations, that the employees or family or whoever it is that's the potential victim, that they are more enabled. They're more technical savvy than they were 25 years ago.
Well, I mean, 25 years ago, I think the whole IT environment, and then with security with it, in businesses as it was coming in, was just a lot more rigid. I mean, just as a function of where the technology was at, how many people had the know-how. Nowadays, you just have tech-savvy people scattered through all departments at all levels. And, like, frighteningly untech-savvy people in some areas where you might expect it, right?
Well, like their bosses.
Yeah.
The ones that make the decisions have no idea what they're deciding on. It's
Ones
purely
that
numbers.
make the most decisions and have the most sensitive data.
Well, but
Go through.
that starts to lead into where I want to have the conversation, where sometimes it's not about the human error. We could focus for hours on just this human element of at the end level, but there are often issues at the higher levels and at this decision making, where and part of me is about the perspectives from each person in every different role. At the end user, they just want to get their job done. They're motivated and measured on accomplishing their job effectively, efficiently, thoroughly, and not sacrificing or compromising the company by doing something they shouldn't have. So that's what they care about. They want it to be easy. They want it to be fast. They don't want to be hindered by security. And that's been part of the problem for end users, has been security is a hindrance. It's a roadblock. It makes me have to struggle harder to do my job and get it done on time. So I'd rather not have to deal with it. So the ideal perfect security solution is one that the user doesn't know is there, but it's being thoroughly effective and stopping any threats and making it all perfect. But that's a utopian, unrealistic thing. That if it existed, we'd all just use it. We're getting closer. I think in some of the technology does a better job. But legacy security back decades ago was all hard, and that's why nobody did it. And that leads to what I think one of the human problems that's not end user is decision making, where an organization might say, for example, one of my favorite examples is multi-factor authentication, or MFA, where we know as an industry, MFA
Very important.
Very, and it's not new. Again, this goes back to ATMs, and you know, if it's good enough for your bank to have your ATM card and know your PIN, you have to have those 2 factors to get my money out of my account. That's been secure and been in place for 40 plus years, maybe 50. It's old school, proven technology, and yet we still just use passwords in too many cases for digital stuff, which are known and secure. But MFA is not easy. It's a little bit more tedious than just a password. let me back up on that, because there are cases where you're forced to use a very complex password.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now instead of memorizing this 32 random characters, you have it written down or stored in a password manager, and now it goes from what a password used to be something that you know,
Right.
which is incredibly hard for somebody to extract outside of torture.
Yeah.
You can't just and you can't lose it, but it's weak.
Well, I think you can lose it very easily.
Yeah.
Well, it can be brute force. There's
Yeah.
things, and if you reuse it, that's a whole different issue.
Yeah.
It's forcing unique passwords. Password managers. The idea is I can use a very complex random password that's harder to brute force, that I don't have to reuse because everyone can be unique. But now, instead of being something that I know, it's something that I have. I have access to that password manager.
Yeah.
And if you can unlock somebody's password manager, now you have all their passwords. So it's got a
There
broader.
goes my life.
Yep.
But it leads to the better combination is some of both. Something you know and something you have. And that ATM card and that PIN
Yeah.
aren't an inconvenience. Carrying the card in your wallet and memorizing a 4 or 6 digit PIN isn't super complex.
Yeah. Right.
And it's effective. So even simple multi-factor auth is proven to be
Right.
much stronger than any single factor of authentication.
Yeah.
Whether it's no, you have, or something they call biometric, something that you are.
Yeah.
I'll disagree. It's still something you have. I am not my thumbprint. I just have it with me all the time. And if it's gone, I'll know. I don't want to dive into that, but the idea of MFA is proven. It's a good idea. It's definitely better than what we've been doing for most of our lives and what too many organizations are still doing in production with massive potential vulnerabilities and risk because it's not convenient.
Yeah.
It's a little bit more of a hassle, and the end user resists adding this couple of seconds to their daily login.
And I
Yeah.
mean, even then, when we are implementing MFA solutions, we're often doing text messages or emails, which again, like,
There's strong MFA and there's weak MFA.
like, great, but
Like, or it's an app, right?
yeah.
Like,
Although
minor
the apps are
apps
generally.
usually.
Like, I mean, I think an authentication app is usually your best bet because they're most of the convenience after the initial setup.
Yeah.
And they're generally a lot safer than your SMS, right? I mean, Eric, you can
Yeah,
disagree
well,
with me on that,
well,
but
it's changing, and I'm not up to date on all
Yeah.
the SMS security, but historically it was very easy to clone a SIM card or
Yeah.
clone a phone.
well, you just
even before
call the
GSM.
carrier.
Exactly. You could spoof it. You could spoof that. Or if you have an app on their device that just forwards all their SMSs to you, I log in as you.
What
It
was
sends
it?
you a text message. I get a copy of it, and I've got your MFA.
I mean,
so
I think there was a story a couple of months ago. I think it was the SEC. We'll have to cut this if I'm wrong, but
we're going to be
their
censored.
Twitter account had MFA with a text message, and someone hacked it by calling the phone number carrier, got the phone carrier social engineered them.
It goes
/
back to the
call
human
center
error.
person wasn't particular, did the steps they were supposed to take, gave the attackers access to the number, and then they were in.
Yeah, and that goes back to that human element.
Yeah.
Where somebody, not the user, not the employer.
Yeah, I mean, in
not
this
anybody
case,
at
it's
the
a
company,
complete
but
third
somebody at
party.
The carrier, a third party, was to blame for a human mistake.
Yeah.
And even that is a mistake. Maybe they were following their procedures, but the procedures had a weakness because they didn't require a good verification that the person is who they say they are.
Yeah.
Or they were just tired and wanted to go home. They were
Yeah.
getting off in 5 minutes. Like, here, let me just reset it for you, tell you what the SMS is. There's all kinds of examples of that. And again, a human piece in that. But back to my point is that MFA is not easy. It's going to introduce at least a minimal roadblock.
Yeah.
Some of the solutions that have been introduced try to make that easier.
Yeah.
And it's not because we need to make it easier. We want adoption rates to be higher. And what I'm kind of driving at here is even if you agree and decide as an organization, we're going to deploy MFA, we're going to implement a solution, we're going to buy, I'm not going to name products, but we're going to pick a product that's going to be stronger authentication so that we don't have weak passwords, so we're not susceptible. And there are organizations that have done that. They've done it mostly effectively, and then they're still breached and trace it back to, oh yeah, there was still something with just a password that somebody compromised, and then that led to lateral movement, and all of our MFA was for naught because you're still only strong as your weakest link.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my point is when deploying MFA, the proper plan is to make sure you're deploying it 100% comprehensively, thoroughly.
Yeah.
And that's where it gets more challenging. So
That sounds hard.
And there are organizations that have done this, let's say, for certain subsets of users, certain departments, MFA to get into this application. And for one thing, if it's a SaaS service, that's one thing, yes, to get to that stuff, which is segregated and segmented from our other stuff, we do MFA to get into that, and that's kind of okay. But if it's internal stuff or connected to other things, or people can then cross laterally between that and something else, then it all needs to be MFA. and it needs to be the same thoroughness, and you need everybody to buy in.
Yeah.
I mean, if you've seen this in some of the readings you've done and some of the breaches that we've seen. What about yourselves? And I don't want to reveal anything, but MFA, do you use it for everything, or is it not even an option for everything?
I mean, I think it's an option for pretty much everything. I can't say I mean, I think the real problem is a lot of the stuff I just log in once when I get a new phone, and then I'm logged in until I...
Yeah.
You don't know your credentials, and then you switch phones, and you have to reset all your
Pretty
passwords.
much. I mean, I have it stored in a password manager, and then, like... I mean, I switched phones relatively recently, so I had a couple of weeks where I was just MFA pinging a lot of these things. This time, the transfer was actually fairly seamless, so it's working. But... Yeah.
Well, I think there's also levels of it where for
Yeah.
some personal things that are very low impact and have no access to anything else, like you talk on some gaming forum or something, your security for that isn't as critical as something that affects your finances.
I mean, they can steal my email with or without a password.
And everybody already has all of our PII anyway, so protecting your phone number doesn't matter. But I think that idea that there are levels where you need to be a little more stringent, have more scrutiny, definitely is true.
Yeah.
But once it gets to your corporate world, this is not up to you as an employee anyway. You know, the average employee within a company, you don't decide what security level your security team does, and you just need to buy in and you need to accept it. If you don't like it, get a job somewhere else. And I've had this harsh line for a long time where you're an employee at will.
Yeah.
If you don't like the policies and you think you're logging in is too much of a pain in the butt, you should be paid more for it. Go get a different job.
Yeah.
That's
And
like a crazy thing to even think, though. Like that you had to take one little extra step to like keep your organization secure. Like,
I think it used to be a bigger issue than it is now. People have come to accept it because they've seen what happens if a company doesn't.
Well, I
and they
think it
don't want their
becomes
company
more
to-
common in your personal life. Like, I mean, as I said, at this point,
If
I
you
am
gotta do
pretty
it.
much MFA on almost all of my other personal accounts, even though there it's usually SMS, whereas at my day job at Atlantic, we have authenticating apps for most of the things, which actually kind of makes the ADS MFA experience a lot simpler.
Well, if it's on a company level and it's integrated, you approach single sign-on or at least fewer sign-on.
Yeah.
But that requires, again, security. If you've got single sign-on and it's weak, now you just increase your
great.
attack exposure much more. But it's a good point. You know, for some personal stuff, maybe not as big of a deal, but it is more commonplace than it was even 5 years
I think
ago.
my bank doesn't even allow an authenticator at this point.
Really?
App. I think I tried a couple
You might
months
not
ago.
want to share that with a
Yeah,
wider
well.
audience, but... Now, who's your bank again?
Yeah.
No.
yeah. And what is your bank account number?
I don't even need to know the bank. I know his name or the number. We'll figure it out. No. And yet, if they don't, and this is another issue, is the motivation of the organization, be it a bank in this case, if they don't secure your account properly and you're defrauded, they're somewhat liable.
Yeah. Well, I think that's actually a good tangent because, I mean, I think the reason that's sort of the case is that most of my banking I do with a fairly local credit union. So they're smaller, they have a lot less tech. Like with, Chase, Bank of America, whatever, I'm pretty sure they have authentication apps that I could be using. Or at least for one of them, I know they have one because for another account I do use it, but...
I think that's a good point, depending on the size of the institution.
Kind of what I was thinking about, like, there are so many different layers of cybersecurity, so many different aspects. There's a degree to which it is just fundamentally unfeasible for small orgs to independently do everything comprehensively. Like, you can't have a team with enough people who know enough about everything.
Now, I agree in one aspect.
Yeah.
In another aspect, the smaller company, it's easier to be comprehensive because you've got greater visibility into everyone. When you get into the massive enterprises, there are so many different departments and organizations. Nobody has, full omniscience and knows what's going on everywhere. So it's harder to police some of that. And you have to trust the hierarchy to filter down and have the same rules everywhere. And it's much harder now because you've got some departments that have different funding, different, P&L, and they make different decisions or they run with some autonomy. And now they don't do MFA, they do, but they've got shared access between them,
Great.
you're susceptible to their weak security and,
Yeah.
and weak authentication. And that's, again, goes back to that human element of who is the czar for the entire organization, and can they successfully implement a policy of strong authentication and strong encryption and all these, whatever the best practice is, and have the entire organization buy in. And it's a different aspect of, I think, where humans are failing, is not individual as much or making mistakes, but it comes down to politics and self-preservation and CYA and how I'm reviewed as a CISO or as a department head or head of development for my company. And my responsibility is getting our software updated and out the door and looking pretty and being mostly stable.
Yeah.
Security belongs to a different department.
Yeah.
There's other guys responsible for security, so I'm not going to worry about that. And yet, if they come to me and say, here's how you need to secure our code.
Yeah.
You need to run this code scanning app. You need to do these things to stop using shared libraries that we know have been a big issue, especially lately, that if we take shortcuts in our coding and use these things that then become vulnerable, we're now vulnerable. But when they tell me how to secure my stuff, I fight and say, no, you do security, I'm going to do development, and I'm going to make our products run, we're going to make our release dates.
Yeah.
And that's one of those other problems where we're fighting within the company and not embracing security fully.
Yeah. I mean, I might be butchering this, but I think this is sort of management adage of like, what you measure is what you do. Sort of the idea of like whatever metrics you install to like measure performance is the performance that's actually going to be carried out. That's often used, I mean, as encouragement that you need to measure the right things. And also sort of as a warning against like trying to measure everything and like, because
Don't just measure the things that make you look good.
well, but like
Choose your own metrics on how
your workers,
how
your
you're reviewed.
teams, whatever, are going to be performing to maximize the metrics, not to do the best job possible.
Yeah. That's
And
very
like in
true.
that sense, with the software development team, if they are measured on deadlines, features, and no security, then they're not gonna do a lot of security. On the flip side, like good luck taking every element of security and making a KPI out of it. That's just not really feasible.
I'll go to one of my silly analogies that I always use.
Here we
I
go.
just thought of this one as you were saying this, where you're trying to meet the metrics that you know are being looked at.
Yeah.
And we'll go to elementary school standardized testing, which we've seen in our area and I'm sure everywhere else, where you get teachers teaching to a test.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where they know the questions that are going to be on this standardized exam that the state is giving, and they teach the students to pass those questions so that the school looks good and gets funding or whatever the issue is. Are they really learning anything, or are they learning the most important things, which is actually, it's actually a good segue to another thing I want to talk about. But you're teaching to the metric and losing the bigger picture.
I mean, I came out of
what
high school
should you
very
really
good,
learn.
guessing my way through multiple choice tests and BSing short essay responses.
You knew what they wanted to hear,
Yeah.
so you say what they want to hear. You know, if you use these certain words and these phrases that the teacher recited, that they're going to, you listened to me, and they give you a better grade than one that actually might be more insightful and show more effort, but it doesn't agree with the teacher, so your grade isn't as good. So you're writing to the teacher. Yeah, and we do see that in organizations to some degree, especially
I mean,
when
that's sort of inevitable, right? Like, that's why your management structure and your leadership, and the leadership being bought into security is so important.
Exactly the point. It's making sure everyone's on the same page. What is our real motivation? We've seen it not that long ago and still today, but very often recently with both insurance and compliance.
Yeah.
Where cyber insurance would say you need to have this, this, and this. They didn't say you had to do it well. You just have to have this and this. Years ago, they've gotten better about this. They've gotten more scrutinized because they don't want to be paying out the policies if they don't have to. So you don't just have to have MFA. You have to use it for everyone, everywhere.
Yeah.
So now, if that's in your policy,
Yeah.
and you didn't do it comprehensively, and it's somebody who still had a password for something, like if Microsoft still had some test accounts on some old servers in their environment that were password only,
Yeah.
randomly, hypothetically,
Would never
how long
happen.
ago was it? Wasn't that long ago.
Never heard that before.
And somebody manages to get into those via standard testing passwords, then they can cross laterally elsewhere. The insurer doesn't want to pay out on that. And they can put it back on you that we found out they did get in through standard passwords without MFA. We don't have to pay your policy. So the insurers are getting much better about getting out of it, basically, which should, and I think is starting to hopefully get organizations to police it more and say, no,
Yeah.
if we don't do this, I'm sorry if you and your department don't like it, you have to do it or we aren't
Yeah.
going to be insurable.
I mean, that sort of touches in with the age-old story in cybersecurity of it's risk management more than anything else, right? If you can't just offload or sell off all your risk to an insurance company, because they're going to force
Or
you
is
to be
it worth it? Is what
Yeah.
we might get. What's the likelihood we're going to get breached and lose something and collect on the policy versus what's it going to cost to avoid it or pay the premiums and maybe we just financially make a decision not to bother and we'll just cross our fingers and hope for the best.
That's sort of an indicator, cyber insurance companies are sort of seeing the pressure that threat actors are putting on insecure systems and having to adjust accordingly, that the policies still make sense for them.
I think compliance is helping drive it a little bit as well,
Well, I think as the business processes mature, hopefully it'll get easier, more straightforward, broadly too.
Yeah, as it becomes more commonplace, an ATM card requires MFA. We don't think about it as MFA. It doesn't seem like it's an inconvenience because we're used to it.
Yeah.
And prior to it, the other thing is before that, we had to go to a bank branch and speak to a teller and fill out a form to get money out of our account.
Yeah.
So the only way it was easier required a PIN and MFA. So
But
we didn't see it as a hindrance.
Do you think it's going to get even harder though? Because look at how much more, I don't know, intelligent, hackers and stuff are getting with retrieving information.
Yeah, I mean, the attacks get more sophisticated all the time.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think that doesn't keep pace with the average user's sophistication and technology.
Yeah.
And that's the problem, is when they're more sophisticated than the users they're attacking,
Right.
and targeting, that's part of the problem. And part of, again, back to why it's still happening, why we're not more secure than we could be and maybe should be.
So it's it's a solution for the time, but as these get more sophisticated and hackers and stuff like that get more sophisticated, then aren't we going to have to implement more?
I mean, it's always it's a constant head-to-head race, right?
Yeah.
But I think also the flip side, even as things are getting more sophisticated, and it's sort of what I thought out as a bit of a throwaway at the beginning, it's always the fundamentals that get you. There are some hackers out there that are quite sophisticated that are doing real threat research to find 0 days and use them, but a lot of it's just relatively unsophisticated or threat actors running vulnerability scans, running
Often there's
threat
a lot of
playbooks.
randomness and luck in it.
Yeah.
They just happen to find a vulnerable system.
In that sense, if you have the basics down, you can protect yourself from 90% of threat actors that are just looking for low-hanging fruit and a quick buck. If someone is specifically targeting you, they're probably going to find a way in eventually, but that's a really vanishingly small aspect of threat actors. And I mean, then you're kind of in the nation state game where if you're a big organization or you're politically involved somehow,
Well,
then it's more of an issue, but that's also a whole different podcast
That's a
topic.
whole other episode. We've talked about future episodes and some of the things. One of the things we want to cover is the question of I'm too small to be a target, so I don't have to worry about security. That's not true. That's a myth we will bust.
You're a quick $50,000.
Exactly. Well, and that's the thing. Enough of those equals one big one that was a lot harder to gain advantage of. So there's definitely some topics there, and some others with nation state is another topic we want to peel back a little bit and highlight. There's plenty of others. But what I'm getting at is I think that a lot of these, if not all of them, will connect back to there's something that could have been done. And part of what I want to do with the whole podcast, with this concept, is talk about those things without specific products and solutions. Even MFA is more specific than I want to be. It's just an example of something that we can do a better
framework
job
to think
of,
with.
and
Everyone
needs to
kind
be
of
done.
knows it.
I even mentioned code scanning, which is just one of those things that could help an organization be more secure, but everybody has to buy in.
Yeah.
And that's part of the problem, is just that political within an organization is me as the head of development either has to cede some control to security and let them secure my stuff because I don't want to, or I've got to take the responsibility and do the right thing and maybe introduce some of those roadblocks into my dev cycle to make my code secure. I have to do one or the other. I can't say, you can't secure it, but I don't want to.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
We have to have it be more of our culture comprehensively. And one of the other places I've seen that is at the CISO role. And the Chief Information Security Officer, and I've said this in other places many times, I would not want the role.
Yeah.
I don't know who would, but it does depend on the organization and how it's being seen. But I think historically, the CISO has been one of those difficult roles. And there's
Like
plenty of exceptions.
a blame shift. It's like a blame shift to them always.
We want the scapegoat.
I was
So,
going to say it's a scapegoat.
you want to be our CISO? Yeah, great. Okay, you're our CISO. If something goes wrong, we're going to come to you. Okay.
It's
Oh, you want to stop that from happening? You want money? You want funding to secure us? No, you can't have that. I want you to be responsible, but I'm not going to give you the control to be effective.
it's telling you you have all the power without giving you the power, and then putting the responsibility on you if something goes
It's
wrong.
giving the responsibility, but not the power.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have all the responsibility, none of the control.
Yeah.
And that's, in many cases, that's been the problem with the CISO role. And we see it now in government trying to force and make individuals accountable who didn't have the ability to do anything about it. That's not correct. But you go at them because they're easy to go at.
Yeah,
The
and
person
you
who
won't
made-
take the blame.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, shout out to the CISO Series podcast a couple of weeks ago. Sort of the anecdote that, like, if you are in the CISO role and you're successful, your company doesn't get breached, great, we can take 10, 20% off your budget and allocate it somewhere else.
Yes.
I mean, do that often enough, and well, what's gonna go? Like, what are you willing to sacrifice on the risk aspect or risk basis if you're in that position? And I mean,
Well, and I've urged people I've talked to that are in that role, whether it's CISO or an equivalent role where they have responsibility. If you want something, if you think there's something that will help you be successful and keep your company safe, and you know they're going to reject it, and purchasing or funding or whoever is responsible is going to say no to you, don't just not ask.
Yeah.
right.
Get it
Ask and document it.
Ask, get it documented that they said no. So then when something does happen, which hopefully never does happen, but if it does or when it does, and they come back to you and say, hey, you did a crap job, you can say, well, no, I didn't.
You did a
said
crap
no
job.
to me.
Yeah.
I told you what we needed, and this would have avoided it. And that's a CYA thing, and I hate the whole CYA mentality and philosophy, but it will eventually then shift that responsibility.
I mean, that's sort of the thing. Like, if the CISO is supposed to own the risk, then they need the tools to own it.
Right.
Not
And again, I hope the CISO role is evolving. I know it is in some areas where they're saying, okay, yes, we're going to give you the responsibility. We'll give you some control, give you more control.
Yeah.
And it's yet one of those thankless things because the best you can do is make nothing ever happen.
Yeah.
You never get to measure that negative of, well, we haven't been breached, so I've done a good job. It's harder to quantify. There are attempts and there are some solutions and products that can help measure all the attempts people made, but they're fudged numbers and inflated. You don't know.
a lot of guesswork and messy and
is.
noisy data.
But there are measurements and there are some things that will help you quantify to some degree how good of a job you're doing in your program. And yet, if it's not 100%, you can still be breached.
Well, and if it's
that's-
100%, there's probably a gap that
Well, and it's only 100% today.
Quantifier hasn't
Well, it's
come.
also it's only 100% today. Reaching 100%,
Yeah.
you don't stay there because the vectors change, things evolve, your environment changes.
someone opens a new cloud
it's
container and
Well, and for our day job's benefit, it never ends.
Yeah.
Security is a constantly moving thing, and it keeps us busy, keeps us on our toes, and keeps us working towards this. And we'll never solve it, and that's part of the answer to the question. Cybersecurity will never be solved.
Yeah.
It'll never be 100% effective because there will always be some new issue that we have to deal with. But what I want to help do, and I've been trying this for a while in different venues, is to help get people talking about those hard discussions that can't be solved with the product. Outside of all the development that's going on and all the amazing products being produced by some great vendors and manufacturers, they're doing really amazing things. If we don't embrace them and implement them and buy into them and deploy them thoroughly and effectively, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So I think we have the ability to have more effective cybersecurity. It exists. But as an industry, as well, not even the cybersecurity industry, I think we're doing okay. Many of us and most of us are trying to, but the clients and the end users could be doing better just by thinking about it, not just buying a product and expecting, I have that, it's going to work, I'm okay, I'm covered. No, you
Right.
need to police it.
And realize that
validate
it's like
it.
a forever evolving
Yeah,
industry.
never
and
rest.
Yeah, and I'm like, if you don't, it's like the knowledge is power thing. If you're not thinking about it and you're not educating yourself on it, or to some degree, then, I mean, you're going to be stupid about it.
Or at least not as smart as you could be.
Yeah.
You need to be more educated, which is part of this. I like having these
Yeah.
conversations. I've been doing this for years with colleagues, with clients, with others. I like having the conversations because I learn something every time. I've learned things today from different perspectives, and I always like to
Yeah.
gather more. And I think that's what's important for everyone to do. And it doesn't require book learning. It's not go study something. It's just talk about things that are sometimes maybe even uncomfortable or not solvable.
Right. Yeah.
You don't have to end in a solution. You can end a conversation with some thoughts and almost more questions than you started with, but at least you're thinking about things that maybe will help you eventually be more progressive and more secure.
Exactly.
And that's really what I want to do, is talk about some of the human side, the other side, and talk about topics and help understand topics in a broader way. You know, and that's what I'm hoping to do more and more. I mean, you mentioned other topics too. We talked about that idea.
Yeah. I mean,
We've talked about a
of
lot of them that
topics,
we already have on our slate to talk about in the future. But some of that is also that specifically human element. You started to touch on one, that like the burning out and the
Well, and I mean, I think that in every discussion so far, it's another topic comes up that we didn't even think of beforehand, that we're like, oh, we should be exploring that.
Yeah.
I
Or
mean,
touch
you guys
on
are going to
that.
be set with podcast episode topics for a long time.
Yeah.
We could do weekly and be busy for the year at this point.
Yeah.
But
It's like me with the blogs.
but I don't want to do it just to do it. I want there to be substance to it. I want there to be some meaning, and we also want our listeners to contribute. If you have a question, you have a thought, even if they're things we've already thought of, let us know that you have that as a question, because it helps validate it and maybe helps prioritize what we cover in the
Well,
topics
and
cover
also
how we
like
cover 'em.
our answer on a question might change significantly 6 months down the road. Like
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
cybersecurity does move fast
Like we-
enough that like
like we said, it's never solved.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
going to evolve, and there
Think-
will be follow up. There will be other avenues we can go down a similar topic.
I mean, there are
but a
some
different-
fundamentals that have been remarkably stable for the past couple of decades, but I mean, also the like relative priority of different things and so on. It's constantly shifting.
and what's timely and
Yeah.
newsworthy and current.
Yep.
But I like to think of things that have a common thread that aren't like just a spike, and that's something else we're going to talk about is hype and certain topics that are
Right,
This
yeah.
is at the top of its
Trending.
hype cycle. It's trending. Everybody thinks this is a priority, and sometimes that's a major detriment because now somebody puts so much focus on this thing
Yeah.
that's getting all this attention when it maybe doesn't really even apply to them.
It's like a smoke show.
And now we're right
You know?
back where we started.
Snake oil.
Yeah.
It's buy this cool new thing because it's a cool new thing, and either it doesn't apply to you, or you have another thing that's much more important because you lack this, or, and I've seen this in cases, you already own a product that can do that. You just didn't buy it for that feature, so you never activated that feature.
Right.
And you don't need to buy that new thing. You already have it. You're already paying for it. And that's part of what we try to do in the day job with ADS is let's get the most out of what you have
Or
instead
like-
of just spending money elsewhere.
In the
Cybersecurity
news-
tools are expensive enough as they are.
Well, even just like in the news of what is going on right now, what you should be focusing on in the realm of cybersecurity, maybe you should actually be focusing on something that's not being talked about. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that I think comes from understanding what those topics really are. And
Yeah.
that's what we want to do is help discuss and learn from and disseminate what they are, what they really mean, whether you should be concerned or not. Like we even say in our opening,
Yeah.
you know, what should we be focusing on
Yep.
versus what seems exciting. And the other aspect of that, which and I don't want to, we got to wrap up, but
Yes.
sometimes you focus on something just because you understand it.
Yeah.
And oh, I'm familiar with this thing, and I know it's on my list of to-dos, so I'm going to focus on the one that I understand because I don't have to learn as much. It'll be easy, and yet it might be the lowest in true priorities.
Right.
So getting your priorities correct is another one of those human aspects. Regardless of the technology, are you focusing on the right things in the right order and prioritizing? And the more you talk about it, the more you think about it, the more you know about it, the better you can do with that. And that's one of the angles I want to dive into more and more.
Yep.
Cool. Well, thank you
Cool.
guys so much.
Thank you.
That was-
it was a pleasure.
That was fun. Again, I always like to learn a little something from it too and
It
share.
was a great
and
3-hour recording session.
yes. Maybe we have 20 minutes usable out of our.
It's been a long day.
You're not going to sell that because somebody will look at the position of the sun hasn't changed enough to be 3 hours. Maybe we just won't share the video so that we can pretend it was 3 hours. But yeah, no, thank you guys so much. I think that was a lot of fun. We'll do this more. We'll see you again plenty. We'll all
Yes.
do this again. But
And I'll be
do we
back here
do we
soon.
have an answer?
Why
to our
isn't
burning
it
question?
more effective?
Wow.
We
I think we have a lot of it.
Yeah, I'm like, I
But,
think we
but
have
can
a
we
lot of
summarize? We
answers.
try to summarize a broad question into one question. Can we summarize a broad answer into one answer? I think I have one.
Okay, shoot.
Let's hear it.
Because we're human.
Yeah,
Okay. I mean, that works for
Does
me.
it work?
yeah.
Yeah.
You can disagree or have your own, but I think that in my thinking of it, because we talk about this as being about human and not just mistakes, but fallibilities and personalities and politics and CYA, the humanity of us keeps us from being more effective.
Yeah. No, I agree.
I'm on board.
Cool. We have an answer. We don't have a solution, but we have an answer.
Yeah. Well.
There's a difference. Cool. Well, thanks again, guys. And
Thank you.
we'll see you next time we have some splaining to do.
Yes.